Chapter 19. Vernon Wycliffe was on his back in the gym working out. He was doing the bench press. He liked lifting weights. He wasn't great at it, but it was something he could do fairly well. Kenny was slim and small for his age. He was better at track and field. But it wasn't the right kind of weather for that. Kenny had had a cold recently and was in the library catching up on his missed work. Vernon had been in the library with him, but then he heard Travers, Montague, and Pittman had made a trip into the village. So Vernon had decided to take the opportunity to lift some weights. Bradley K. Pittman was Travers and Montague's latest associate. Travers and Montague had befriended him soon after they rejected Vernon. Pittman had beady black eyes and wore his black hair in a crew cut. He was large for a second year. Pittman came from a fine family, but had poor scores, until Travers and Montague showed him the finer art of cheating. Partly because of his improved grades, Pittman thought Travers and Montague could do no wrong. He followed any suggestion they made without question. He wasn't much of a fighter, but Pittman could hold his own against almost anyone by sheer weight. Montague had been in a real snit ever since he accidentally spilled ink all over his hand. Vernon and Kenny had taken great pains to keep their distance and avoid his wrath. Vernon suspected Montague had gone into the village to find some stain removal supplies. He hoped they found something that worked. Maybe Montague wouldn't glare at everyone so if his hand wasn't stained. Normally Kenny spotted for Vernon, but today Vernon had gotten one of the other students already in the gym to help. Vernon had already lifted 2 sets of 40 kilogram and was resting before his third. His spotter, Callahan, had to go to the loo, so Vernon closed his eyes and focused on relaxing his muscles while he waited for Callahan's return. A shadow above his head indicated Callahan's return. "Ready?" came the voice of the shadow. It was a familiar voice, but not that of Callahan. Vernon opened his eyes and twisted his head back to look up into the face above him. Travers. Vernon's blood seemed to freeze, all thoughts of weariness forgotten. "Callahan remembered he had some homework to do," said Travers lazily, "so I offered to fill in a spotter for you. Wasn't that nice?" He smiled at Vernon. It was not a nice smile. Vernon twisted to get up, but the firm pressure of a knobbly stick in the center of his chest held him down. His eyes followed the arm holding the stick, and he looked up at its owner, Montague. Standing next to him was Pittman, holding his own knobbly stick out ready for use. "Did you think we were in the village, Wycliffe?" said Montague softly, bending down so Vernon could see his face clearly and hear every word. The knobbly stick was pressed firmly into his chest. "You're very predictable. We both know how boring the library is, and I knew you'd head straight for the gym if you thought we weren't around. Professor Kleinstadt got an urgent message to go to the main office, by the way," added Montague. "I offered to watch the gym for him. He thought that was very responsible of me. Don't you agree?" Vernon swallowed nervously. He turned his head and looked around the gym. Except for the 4 of them, it was empty. This was not good at all. "It occurs to me," began Montague, removing his knobbly stick from Vernon's chest, "that I have seriously neglected your physical development." Vernon tried to sit up again, but Pittman promptly dug his knobbly stick into Vernon's chest, holding him down, making breathing difficult. Pittman smiled cheerfully while he watched Vernon's discomfort. Montague strolled to the end of the bench and casually picked up some more weights. Vernon twisted his head and watched apprehensively as Montague attached more weights on one end and Travers placed an equal amount on the other. "What are you doing?" he finally asked, trying hard to keep the worry out of his voice. "What do you think?" replied Montague calmly as he worked. "Helping you improve your physique." "That's too many," Vernon said. "I can't lift that many." Montague bent down so his face was almost on top of Vernon's. "Are you saying I don't know what I'm doing?" he asked softly. His breath felt hot on Vernon's skin. "Yes," replied Vernon, barely able to keep his voice steady. "Wrong!" Montague's voice exploded in Vernon's ear, making Vernon's head jerk reflexively, bouncing against the bench. "You've got to add the weights. You've got to test yourself beyond your limits so you can improve." Montague straightened. "I'm merely trying to help you," he added righteously. Vernon said nothing. There was nothing to be said. Nothing that would persuade Montague of anything. "He's not being respectful," said Pittman from behind Montague. "He should appreciate what you're trying to do for him." Pittman pushed his stick even deeper in Vernon's chest, keeping Vernon firmly pinned to the bench. Vernon struggled to breathe. "True," agreed Montague. "Can I use my knobbly stick to show him some respect?" Traditionally, knobbly sticks were used only on students younger than the wielder, but in Pittman's case, he used it on anyone Travers and Montague told him to use it on. Pittman especially liked using his stick on students older than himself. No one dared complain. "I must confess," began Montague thoughtfully, "that you do need a lesson in respect, and it would be interesting to see if your pale flesh would turn the same color as the ink on my hand." Montague thrust his violet-stained hand over Vernon's eyes, illustrating the color. His hand was so close it nearly touched Vernon's eyelids. Vernon turned his head away from the hand and looked over at Montague. "What?" he asked in surprise, all thoughts of fear temporarily driven from his mind. It was such a strange thing for Montague to say. Montague studied Vernon's face closely. "You really don't know, do you?" he said finally. "Know what?" asked Vernon, confused. "What am I supposed to know?" Montague removed his hand from Vernon's sight. "Never mind," he said as he moved back to the weights. Montague lifted one end off the stand, and Travers lifted the other. The two positioned the weight over Vernon's chest. "Take the weight," commanded Montague coldly. "No," refused Vernon. "It's too heavy, too dangerous. You can't make me take that." "Take the weight, Wycliffe," ordered Montague, "before Travers and I accidentally drop it on your chest. Who knows what damage that may do?" Vernon didn't respond. He turned his head and studied Travers' face, and then turned to watch Montague's face anxiously. "On the count of 3, said Montague determinedly. 1, 2, 3. There was no doubt, no hesitation in their eyes. They were going to drop it. Vernon quickly extended his arms to receive the weight. The bar rested on Vernon's palms, and his fingers reluctantly curled around it. Montague nodded briefly at Pittman, and Pittman removed his knobbly stick from Vernon's chest, enabling Vernon to breathe freely again. Montague and Travers released their grip, and Vernon took the full weight of the bar on his arms. Vernon locked his elbows straight in an attempt to hold the bar in the air. The bar was heavy, too heavy. Unbalanced, it swayed to one side. "Whoops," said Montague casually, reaching out to center the bar and stop the sway. "Wouldn't want it to fall over and drop now, would you?" That had exactly been the idea, as Vernon had tried to toss the weight on the floor. But Montague and Travers stood on either side, keeping the bar from toppling. "See," said Montague in a hard, unsympathetic voice, "I knew you could lift it." "It's too heavy," repeated Vernon, barely able to talk while he focused on keeping his arms straight. "Get it off." "But you haven't done any lifting yet," stated Montague coldly. "You can't improve yourself if you don't do the exercises." He pushed down on the center of the bar until Vernon's arms could no longer take the strain. They collapsed, bringing the barbell swiftly down with them. Montague and Travers caught the barbell ends, barely preventing the actual bar from landing on Vernon's chest. Just barely. Then they let go, leaving Vernon to deal with its full weight again. Vernon's arms trembled as he tried to keep it off his chest. His breath came in short gasps as he struggled to keep the bar up. Stars swam before his eyes. "You've got to lift it," insisted Travers, enjoying Vernon's discomfort. He was kneeling down and speaking in Vernon's ear. "You can do it," he encouraged in a honeyed voice that oozed false concern. "Yeah, lift it," joined in Pittman cheerfully, clearly enjoying the show. "I can't," insisted Vernon, gritting his teeth. He didn't know how much longer he would be able to keep the weight off his chest. "Then let's think of something you can do," said Montague suddenly, his voice sounding loudly in Vernon's other ear. "Like talk." "Huh?" asked Vernon, turning his head up, trying to focus on Montague. Montague's nose nearly touched Vernon's cheek while he spoke. "Talk," repeated Montague in Vernon's ear. The icy tone of his voice sent shivers throughout Vernon's whole body. "Tell us anything and everything about Perkins, for example. All the dirty and dark little secrets he has ever told you." The puff of air from every word Montague spoke blew across Vernon's cheek and into his ear, chilling Vernon even further. Or about that crazy, skinny little sister of yours who thinks she's a witch, added Travers in Vernon's other ear. Yeah, laughed Pittman from above. And then if you ask real polite, maybe I'll lift the barbell up for you. Well, insisted Montague, what have you got to say? He leaned over closer and whispered directly in Vernon's ear. If you say please, we'll even hold the barbell for you while you talk, as long as you keep us interested. More stars appeared swimming in Vernon's vision as he fought to keep the barbell up. You'd better make up your mind fast, though, added Travers from the other side. Judging from your red face and your shaking arms, I'd say you haven't much time. Hello, is anybody there? The voice barely penetrated Vernon's consciousness, so focused was he on keeping the barbell off his chest. I thought I told you to lock the door, hissed Montague furiously. I did, I swear I did, whispered Pittman. Yes, there is someone. Oh, what a relief. The voice was louder and closer now. Montague looked over his shoulder at its source. Go away, old man, said Montague loudly, annoyed at being disturbed. It had to be a stranger, or Montague wouldn't have been so rude. The voice sounded vaguely familiar to Vernon, but he couldn't spend time puzzling it. He was worrying about more immediate things. He doubted he had the strength enough to even call out for help. I would, yes, I would, came a high-sounding, timid voice. It was very close now, almost overhead. But I'm terribly lost, and I say, is that lad okay? He looks a little blue. A moment later, Vernon felt the barbell removed from his hands, and he heard the familiar clink as it came to rest on its stand. He dropped his arms in relief. Stars still floated around his eyes from the exertion. He's fine, Vernon heard Montague say to the stranger disgustedly. He was just challenging his muscles, seeing how far they would go. There was a warning note in Montague's voice, promising dire consequences should Vernon contradict him. You were saying, Montague continued, addressing the stranger. Ah, yes, began the stranger in that high voice. I've been trying to find the office of the headmaster, and I must have gotten terribly turned around. I'm not very good with maps, you see. The voice sounded strangely familiar indeed. The stars had cleared a bit, so Vernon twisted his head up to look at the stranger, and nearly dropped his mouth open in surprise. Cousin Harry! What was he doing here? Fortunately, no one saw Vernon's reaction. They were busy looking at Cousin Harry while listening to the story he was telling. So I've been wandering all over trying to find someone to give me directions. There's nobody outside on the grounds, and then I saw the open door at this building, so I came on in. You wouldn't happen to know the way to the headmaster's office, would you? Yeah, said Montague with resignation. Go out that door, he pointed, and 4 buildings to the left. You can't miss it. There's a sign saying main office outside. Cousin Harry was dressed in a light gray suit that was all rumpled and wrinkled. His hair was messed and his glasses askewed. Now he drew a pen out and started writing, of all places, on his hand. Out that door, he muttered to himself, and 4 buildings. Excuse me, was that to the right or the left? Left, said Travers, barely able to disguise his contempt. Ah, yes, left, replied Cousin Harry with a smile while he wrote that down. And then, excuse me again, glancing up with a worried look on his face, but do I go into the 4th building or the one after the 4th? Is this the 1st building or the one before the 1st? Cousin Harry looked like an ineffectual idiot. That wasn't the way he had looked when Vernon last saw him during the holidays, or in the kitchen with Dad, or in the garage the night before. Cousin Harry was putting on an act of some sort. Into the 4th, said Pittman with a sneer, and start counting once you leave this building. Even he knew that. Yes, yes, thank you, said Cousin Harry, busily writing, taking no notice of the sneer. Now let's see if I've got this straight. He looked up. I go out this door. Cousin Harry pointed to an exit different from the one Montague had indicated earlier. No, said Montague angrily. Cousin Harry jumped back like a startled bird, dropping his pen in the process. He bent down and fumbled around, trying to pick it up. I can show you, volunteered Vernon, quickly rolling off his back and sitting up. His arms were still weak, but there was nothing wrong with his legs. Both Montague and Travers shot Vernon a poisonous glance. Would you? Said Cousin Harry eagerly. Would you really? Having gotten his pen, he stood and straightened his glasses, looking at Vernon directly for the first time. "That would be wonderful. I don't seem to be very good at directions either," Cousin Harry confessed. "But I wouldn't want you to stop what you were doing on my account." "That's okay," said Vernon quickly. "I'm finished here anyway." He grabbed his towel with shaky fingers, slung it over his shoulders, and stood up. Then he walked towards Cousin Harry. Montague moved in front of Vernon, blocking his way. The two stared at each other wordlessly, face to face. "Later," Montague finally hissed, stepping aside. Vernon passed him without comment. "Come this way," directed Vernon, walking to the correct exit. Cousin Harry followed. "This is so good of you," he said loudly to Vernon as they left. "And they say young people have no manners these days." "Are you okay?" Cousin Harry asked in a low voice as soon as they stepped outside. The concern in his voice revealed that he had known exactly what was going on in the gym. He was not the idiot Montague supposed him to be. "Yeah," replied Vernon, "thanks." His arm still felt weak from the exertion, but otherwise he was fine. Things could have turned out much worse. They started walking towards the main office. After a few steps, Cousin Harry spoke again. "I expect your father would hit the roof if he knew I had visited you at Smeltings." Vernon nodded. Dad was touchy about Cousin Harry. "Well, I would never ask you to lie to your parents," Cousin Harry continued. "I would request that you not mention our meeting without good cause." Yeah," agreed Vernon. "I can do that." Silence was a small enough price to pay for getting away from Travers and Montague fairly unscathed, as if he would ever discuss that kind of thing with his dad anyway. Cousin Harry?" "Yes?" "Don't take this the wrong way," began Vernon. "I mean, I really appreciate you getting me out of that tight spot and everything. But why are you here?" "I came to deliver a letter to you from your sister Holly," replied Cousin Harry. "I intended to leave it on your pillow or bed or something," he said, pulling out a folded piece of paper from inside his jacket. "But I saw all the students leave the gym on the run and decided to investigate." Cousin Harry handed the letter to Vernon. Vernon stopped walking to open the letter and read the message. He looked up at Cousin Harry with confusion. "It says here that I should be very careful and watch out for trouble." "That sounds like excellent advice," replied Cousin Harry neutrally. "But how did she know I'd have problems?" Cousin Harry resumed walking. Vernon followed alongside. "It seems," began Cousin Harry slowly, "that your sister sent you a letter a few weeks ago." "She did?" Vernon asked with surprise. "I never got any letter." "That would be the problem," stated Cousin Harry calmly. "The letter was booby-trapped," he explained. "It dripped ink should anyone but you open the letter." "Ink?" said Vernon, confused. "Violet ink." "Violet?" asked Vernon thoughtfully. "Montague," he said suddenly with understanding. "So that's how he got his hand all stained." "I would guess so." Vernon chuckled at the thought. "And he couldn't say a word about how it happened without admitting he'd been reading my mail. No wonder he's been so mad. And I thought it was Travers doing it." "Travers," replied Cousin Harry thoughtfully as they walked. "The other gentleman beside your head?" "Yes." "I think you would do well to avoid them." "I do," insisted Vernon. Then, realizing he'd been found with them, Vernon added, "I thought they were at the village today." "Devious as well," observed Cousin Harry calmly. "Maybe now that Montague realizes you know nothing about the ink, he will feel he has made his point sufficient enough to not plan another such event." "But I do know about the ink," protested Vernon. Now," he amended. "I don't think I would tell Montague that, ever," replied Cousin Harry sternly, looking directly at Vernon while they walked. Vernon looked down. "No," he agreed thoughtfully, slowing to a stop. "I shouldn't." Cousin Harry nodded, satisfied at Vernon's response. Then Cousin Harry spoke again. "Until I suggested the possibility, Holly had no idea her little trick might cause you problems. You may rest assured it will not happen again. Nor need you worry about someone else reading your letters from Holly again, either. I'll be delivering them." Cousin Harry looked around. "Why have we stopped?" he asked suddenly. "That's the main office," answered Vernon, pointing to a nearby building. Cousin Harry looked briefly at the building. "Thank you for directing me," he said solemnly. "Where will you be going next, if you don't mind my asking?" Vernon thought quickly. I guess I'll go back to the library. Kinney should be there doing homework. I think I would very much like to see the library, said Cousin Harry quietly. Could you show it to me as long as you're already headed that way? Sure, replied Vernon. To be honest, he was rather glad for the company. He didn't want to risk running into Montague again, especially now that he knew the cause of Montague's colored hand. Are those the dorms? Asked Cousin Harry, pointing to some buildings to one side while they walked. Yes, replied Vernon. Would you happen to know in which room this Montague resides? Sure. Third floor corner room on the east side. It's one of the nicest rooms, reserved for the upperclassmen. Why? Just curious. Where do you stay? On the second floor on the other side, answered Vernon. It's a lot smaller. Might I ask which room number for the purpose of future mail deliveries? Cousin Harry explained while they walked. Room 213, replied Vernon. Look, there's the library, Vernon added, pointing to a smaller building in the direction they were headed. It always has students in it on the weekends, trying to complete homework at the last minute. Good, replied Cousin Harry. There is safety in numbers. They drew up to the door and stopped outside the entrance. Is Kinney inside? Asked Cousin Harry curiously. Vernon looked through the window in the door. Yes, he replied. I can see him at one of the tables. Then I will be on my way, said Cousin Harry abruptly. He stepped back away from the door. I am very glad to have had the opportunity to chat with you, Vernon. Perhaps we can do it again sometime. Good day. Yes, replied Vernon. Thanks for the, visit. Thanks for the help. Cousin Harry nodded. Any time, he said gravely. He turned and started walking away. Vernon opened the door to the library. Before he entered, Vernon glanced over his shoulder for one last look at the receding figure of Cousin Harry. But there was no one out there. No one at all. All-purpose ink and spot remover. Guaranteed. That's what the label read on the small bottle Hilbert John Bartholomew Montague III held in his hand. It was such a plain bottle, made of clear glass with a clear liquid within, that Hilbert doubted he would have given it a second glance had he seen it on the shelf in the village. But that's not where he found the bottle. Hilbert had found it on his desk. Not only did Hilbert distinctly remember there being no bottle on his desk when he had left earlier that evening for dinner, but the bottle had been placed directly on the desk's purple ink stain. Ever since the ink had dribbled onto the desk, Hilbert had kept his desk covered with papers in case of a surprise inspection, when the stain might be discovered and he would be made accountable for the damage to the desk. Those papers had been neatly set aside, revealing the entire purple stain. The bottle had been placed in the center of the stain, as if inviting Hilbert to use it for that particular stain. Someone had been in his room and wanted him to use this particular bottle. Was it a trick? Cautiously, Hilbert unscrewed the bottle. Attached to the center of the bottom of the lid was a tiny stick with a small sponge on its end. It looked similar to a fingernail polish brush, except for the sponge part. Carefully, Hilbert touched the bottom of the damp sponge to a corner of the stain. The hated purple color vanished immediately, leaving a spot of the original tan-colored desk beneath. Hilbert brushed the sponge across the desk in a path directly through the spot. The purple vanished under the sponge, leaving a trail of tan-colored desk in its wake. Using the sponge as a paintbrush, Hilbert carefully painted away the entire stain on the desk. The surface of the desk dried almost immediately. Hilbert couldn't tell a stain had ever been there in the first place. Regarding the sponge almost hopefully, Hilbert touched it carefully on one of his own purple-colored fingers. Like the desk, the purple vanished immediately, leaving clean skin behind. It took most of the liquid in the bottle, but Hilbert was able to paint away every bit of purple on his hand, palm, and wrist. For the first time in ages, Hilbert dared breathe a sigh of relief. He'd been secretly afraid that the purple would never come off. Using the remainder of the liquid in the bottle, Hilbert painted away the purple color of ink that had fallen on his books. When he finished, it was as if the disastrous event of Holly's letter had never occurred. Hilbert tucked the bottle carefully away with Holly's 3 blank letters and the Smith envelopes. He went to sleep that night, tired but satisfied. It remained to be seen if the ink would still be gone in the morning, or if this was all some part of a wild dream, but Hilbert was hopeful. In the morning, Hilbert woke and found himself staring stupidly at the cleared-off desk. Why did it look so good? Then he remembered the ink in the bottle. Hilbert checked his hand. Yes, it was still normal colored. It hadn't been a dream. He reached into the drawer to get out the emptied bottle of spot remover. He wanted to examine it closer in the daylight, but it wasn't there. He dug all around the drawer, finally pulling out everything in his search, but there was no bottle of remover. Also missing were the 3 blank letters of Holly and the Smith envelopes. But that didn't matter. Holly was sure to write again, and Hilbert would be waiting. He planned to open her next letter while wearing plastic gloves, or, better yet, using tweezers. Holly's letter would be held over a large bowl in the sink when he did it, too, just in case. Maybe he could collect some of that drippy ink to study. Hilbert could get Travers to take a video while he opened the letter, so the vanishing or dripping ink would be recorded as well. Either one was equally unusual, but the drippy stuff would make a much more impressive movie. He could probably sell the tape and make big money, or just use it as blackmail. The possibilities were endless. Hilbert dressed swiftly and prepared for the day. Things were looking up indeed. Gradually, Holly's life became routine. She attended classes, mixed potions in her free time, and practiced dueling once a week. Holly rarely won a dueling contest, but the other students got her to watch the opponent with her eyes, not just her mind, and sometimes Holly got in a lucky shot. Holly often did one final duel after the Auror students had paired off and practiced dueling against each other. She discovered that when the group was weary, they were most likely to let slip emotions or physical cues that Holly could use to win her own duels. Holly no longer felt guilty using her empathic skills against them. They won enough duels with their alchemy to offset any wins she might achieve. One day, after a particularly grueling session between the 4, Holly faced off one last time against Matthew. Matthew's emotions often seeped out when he was tired or excited, and on this day, Holly could sense his emotions easily. Holly stood at attention, concentrating with her mind, waiting for Matthew to make the first move. Suddenly, Holly felt a sharp wrench of her arm, and Matthew shot his spell, slamming Holly against the floor before she could react. Stunned, Holly looked around, trying to figure out what happened. Sean was rubbing his shoulder. Ravenda stood next to him, but was smiling at Holly. What had Ravenda done? You telegraph when you use your senses, explained Matthew as he offered Holly a hand up. It's different when you use your eyes to watch us. It was too good an opportunity to miss, so Ravenda twisted my arm to distract you, put in Sean. Holly dusted herself off. You cheated, she said, hurt. Not physically, but she felt betrayed by the trick. No, corrected Roland. We found a weakness and used it. Dark wizards don't play fair. But I'm not practicing against dark wizards, complained Holly. I'm just trying to learn how to duel. Why do you think we learn dueling? Asked Ravenda. So we can prepare against dark wizards. But I'm not the one planning to hunt dark wizards, protested Holly. You are. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared against any tricks a dark wizard may pull. Whether you like it or not, continued Matthew seriously, a dark wizard may decide to hunt you. Me? Exclaimed Holly. Whatever for? You're an empath, replied Roland, and that makes you a target for a dark wizard. He can put on a face of absolute innocence that would fool everyone, except you. Whether he is practicing alchemy or not, you might still guess he is up to something. That makes you a danger to him. Dark wizards are often charismatic, added Ravenda. If one can persuade you to help, you would make a most useful tool for a dark wizard, identifying potential new recruits, ferreting out dissenters and spies. If he can't gain your cooperation willingly, he could force you to help him by invading your mind, using the Imperius or Cruciatus spell, or just plain blackmail. Or a dark wizard might decide to remove you as a potential threat before you even know he's there, said Sean, and you would vanish, never to be seen again, as so many of Lord Voldemort's early opponents did. These aren't games we play, said Roland earnestly, and you've got to take them seriously. You're helping us, and we're trying to help you. What'll I do? Asked Holly, her lips trembling. Practice, put in Ravenda, a lot, and not just duels. Learn selective blocking, added Matthew, and anything else you can do with your skill to give you an edge. Always be alert to things going on around you, everything, insisted Sean, both those you can and cannot sense. Above all, added Roland with feeling, be ready for the unexpected and the unknown. Surprise is a dark wizard's best weapon. I'll try, was all Holly could say. Do more than try, insisted Ravinda, coming up and giving Holly a hug. I kind of like you. We all do. And we'd hate to see anything happen to you. Yeah, agreed the others, hugging her also. I can't do it, Holly told Roland as they walked the corridors back to their dorm. Do what? I can't do selective blocking, replied Holly. You know, I've tried and it just isn't working. Nothing at all? No, said Holly dejectedly. The nearest I've come to was at the Quidditch match, when I passed out because Rupert got hit with a bludger. If I had been paying attention to the other emotions out there, it wouldn't have hurt so. So that isn't going to work either. I just don't know what to try next. Said Roland thoughtfully as they rounded the corner. We'll have to work on that. Hey, DeWitt, came a derisive voice from across the hall. Isn't she a little young for you? Tom Richards and his girlfriend Paige were sauntering up the corridors towards them. Paige's silky long black hair, as usual, hung straight, tied neatly to one side. Holly secretly wondered if she had hexed it to stay so straight and untangled. Today Paige wore a flowing white dress with a green snake-like belt. She also wore green eyeshadow, which matched the twin emerald green viper snake choker around her neck. Paige's face showed her usual disinterest in Richard's aggressive ways. Richards moved closer, blocking their way, forcing Holly and Roland to stop. Richards had grown over vacation and was as tall as Roland. They faced each other eye to eye. Oh, give it a rest, Richards, said Roland wearily, refusing to rise to the bait. No wonder we Hufflepuffs insist the younger students travel in groups. Last year you tried to hook up Holly with James, and now this year it's me. What'll you do next year? Pair her with some Slytherin? Richards made a face at the suggestion. His sandy-colored hair had grown to shoulder length and had been tied back into a short ponytail. One stray strand hung down out of place rebelliously. Richards brushed the strand out of the way and looked down at Holly, regarding her disdainfully with his hazel eyes as he spoke. None of us would ever give a second glance at a mudblood like her, he said sarcastically. The why you would is beyond me. I wouldn't, replied Roland evenly. Not that way. I just hate seeing the younger students get harassed when you Slytherins get bored. Now, if you don't mind, I have a ton of work to get done, and you're in our way. Richards was reluctant to step aside, but had no excuse to hold them further when Paige suddenly spoke up. How is the Smith girl? She asked in a disinterested voice while staring directly at Holly. Still sleeping away her free time? Her black eyes glittered, and she leaned sinuously against Richards while waiting for a response. She's, fine now, said Holly. Paige gave a satisfied smile that reminded Holly of a well-fed snake, so Holly added, But to be honest, I don't know whether it was your second potion that made the difference or whether the first one finally wore off on its own. Paige's expression immediately went blank, and she sank deeper into Richard's arm, holding on like a clinging vine. It doesn't matter anyway, she said coolly. We've developed a much better version now. Come along, Tom, she said, giving a gentle tug on his arm. I believe some of my potions need stirring. Tom gave one final glare at Holly and Roland before turning and walking off with Paige. Holly and Roland continued on their way to the dorms. I understand Richard signed up for alchemy this year, said Roland conversationally as they mounted the steps and were well out of Richard's hearing. How is he doing? Not too good, replied Holly. I'd have never known it if you hadn't said something. Roland nodded. I would expect that. He's a very angry person, and one has to maintain a fair amount of calm to master alchemy. Paige, on the other hand, continued Holly, is a natural. She has perfect control. She has, replied Roland as they got off the stairs and started down the corridor. That's interesting. Why? Because Paige never signed up for the class. She didn't? No. I thought it strange when I saw the roster, Roland added. Paige and Richards are usually inseparable, but if she could already do alchemy, that would explain things. Do you, Holly began hesitantly, do you think Paige is a dark wizard? What do you think? Holly thought of Paige's cold, glittery eyes and indifferent attitudes. Had she ever felt Paige's emotions? Holly honestly didn't know. She's creepy, said Holly finally, but most of the Slytherins are. What does a dark wizard feel like? I have no idea, replied Roland sincerely. But remember this, it is not one's emotions, but one's actions that make a dark wizard, and I've never heard of Paige doing anything even remotely dark. What'll we do? Asked Holly as they rounded a corner and turned down another corridor. Holly was not entirely convinced of Paige's innocence. You, began Roland finally after he thought a bit, should visit Professor Lovegood and see if she has any books on alchemy you can borrow. If Paige can learn it on her own, you can too. And while you're there, he added as an afterthought, ask her if she has any ideas on how to selectively block. It is one thing when you are trying to learn selective blocking as a medical activity. It's another when you need to learn it as part of your defenses against the dark arts. That makes it Professor Lovegood's department. They reached the Hufflepuff dorm entrance. Roland and Holly stopped. Make sure you go with someone, added Roland. You really shouldn't wander these halls alone. What'll you be doing? Asked Holly, suddenly realizing Roland didn't intend to enter with her. I have a letter to mail, so I'll be going to the Owlry. The Owlry, said Holly aghast. That's a major hike the other way. You shouldn't have come up to the dorms with me first. I was serious about younger Hufflepuffs traveling in groups, said Roland earnestly. There is safety in numbers. Oh, and let me know if you start to experience any weird or unusual dreams, he added. That could be a sign of someone trying to invade your mind. See you later. Then he took off in the opposite direction, leaving Holly alone at the entrance. The judge looked at Holly threateningly. Password? He demanded gruffly. Holly looked about uncertainly, trying to think of something to say. Finally she asked, What do ghosts do at an amusement park? What? Growled the judge. They ride roller coasters. Amid the howls of laughter, Holly stepped through the passageway and into the dorms.